topic of interest on debt is a topic that has a very long historical context. All major religions have forbid it, and it has a long history in secular areas of those who oppose it and those who support it. In today's modern world, the topic of interest on debt, also known as usury, is seen as standard business practice, as necessary to a growing economy. Rent on money. The lender risks their money, and in exchange gets paid for the risk of doing so. The concept of charging interest on debt being something that is controversial, immoral, or wrong is a concept so foreign and strange to most modern people they would react in shock and awe to such a suggestion. The more educated a person is, the more likely it is they will have a knee-jerk negative emotional reaction, proclaiming such a thing as propaganda, crazy, radical, and so forth. This historical concept of interest or usury being a bad thing is either brushed aside or met with brief objections. The first time I came across this concept, I was inquisitive. I wanted to know more. Why would all major religions forbid it? Why were there so many bans on it that were not of a religious nature? It is a complex topic, and I can't possibly delve into the entirety of it, but I do want to address the core of the issue head on. What I have found is that the general public, those in the university, the business sectors, and the government just turn a blind eye to the topic, ignore it, and simply dismiss any objections to interest on debt. If that does not work, they attack those who do as some kind of crazy radicals. Most don't even think of it as a topic to be discussed as controversial. What I am going to do here in this video is present one such radical who opposes the topic of interest on debt and his copyright-free booklet on the topic, which is available online for anyone to read for free. I have simply put it in an audio form, but I want to give some background upon the author, Pastor Sheldon Emery, so the listener knows where he is coming from and my take on some of his views and why I think the topic is worth exploring. As one who has an inquiring mind, I like to see how others think, to explore new concepts, and ultimately to have my own views upon the topic or topics. Well, if you are looking to the high and mighty, the highly educated, the very smart people, those out there in the limelight with lots to say, high IQs, well-spoken, and the like, to give you any insights into the topic of interest on debt and its moral, political, and social implications, forget it. It is not coming. Someone like me, as so-called nobody, has more interesting things to say on the topic than all of the high and mighty do combined. For me, the word interesting came to mind when I first heard of the topic. I think we all have concepts in our minds and we never question those concepts or even know where they came from. I think a philosopher questions the most basic assumptions. For most people, the topic of interest on debt, its historical context, whether or not there is any morality around it, is not even in question. It is not even in play. They just accept that it is what it is in the modern world of their day-to-day life. If someone says otherwise, they are maligned. And maligned by the high and mighty, the press, the university intellectuals, the economic gurus of various schools of thought, and so forth. Come to think of it, when have you heard any of them question it or deal with it in depth? If I say never, I am most likely right. And by the way, I want the audience to know up front I am biased. I do not like the high and mighty of the world. The politicians, the lawyers, the press, the university intellectuals, the clergy, the spiritual gurus, most gurus, corporate fat cats, and other leading people of our day. Now, I'm not saying this as a blanket statement because there are exceptions, but by and large, I would rather spit on them. Let us just say, the things they are doing to their fellow man certainly are not in line with what I consider moral. Nevertheless, back to the topic at hand, interest on debt. Let us start with the fact that all major religions hold usury as unjust, even an evil. And when I say usury, I mean any interest on debt. As in some circles, usury is defined as excessive interest on debt. But that definition runs into trouble when someone asks just what is excessive interest. And the answer is going to vary from person to person, leaving us with no firm answer to just what is excessive interest. Free market economics argues for no cap on interest rates and wants, quote, the market to decide, or that the market will work it out naturally. Later on, we will see that there are flaws with this line of thinking. Anyway, Religions worldwide have banned any interest on debt. And here is my personal analysis of the reason why religions have banned it. And I could be wrong, but I think it is a perspective worth considering. I think the clergy, being in a higher position in society, had a good overview of many social factors most could not see. And what they saw was those charging interest were getting very rich, while those who were paying it were getting poor and in some cases poorer or destitute. I think this disparity, seen in all cultures, gave rise to the idea that usury was wrong. It was seen as a social injustice, even seen as a predatory practice. It is one thing if the clergy says it is wrong, but if God says it is wrong, or some other higher authority, then there is no argument. It is wrong. And the clergy, being close to political power, if not sometimes one and the same thing, had enough influence to outlaw it. In some cases, there were no pious overtones to its opposition. I think some secular leaders also saw this disparity and felt the result of this imbalance was wrong and that such a practice should be outlawed. In the particular case of Pastor Sheldon Emery, who wrote the book Billions for the Bankers and Debts for the People, he comes at it from a strictly religious point of view. The Bible does clearly condemn the use of usury. So if you are a pastor, a believer, and the Bible is the Word of God, and God is all-knowing, and the Bible or God's Word clearly, unmistakably forbids the taking of usury, then it is logical that from such a standpoint you would also find it wrong. There are some issues we need to address before going on. First of all, this point of view that usury is immoral is clearly in conflict with today's widespread practice in the universal world banking system. For the banks to suddenly say, well, God is right in the Bible, we should not be charging interest, and then stop it altogether is not going to happen. Not a snowball's chance in hell. With all the intellectuals, the politicians, the power elites backing the banking system, it clearing is not going to happen. As a matter of fact, anyone who opposes it is going to be maligned. Now, on to something also important here about Pastor Emery. He was, as he is no longer alive, considered a radical, even cultish by some Christians. The reason why is because Pastor Emery belonged to the Christian identity movement, which claims that the white Europeans are actually the descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Now, the Christian identity movement is not the only ones claiming to be of the lost tribes. There are Black Israelite sects. There are others throughout the world claiming the same thing. My personal take on this issue is that white Europeans can be traced back long before there was ever such a thing as Israel or Jews. Same with Black Africans. So I do not think Europeans or Blacks are of the 10 lost tribes, as I do not think the many other groups that claim to be are either. And it is my personal opinion that white and Black histories are more fascinating than that of Jews. And there is no need to claim to be something you are not. I believe the scientific facts support this thesis of mine. I think the emergency of man, Homo sapiens, is best described by archaeology than it is by any religious text. And the whole thesis of identity moments of any group is based upon religious text. I personally do not take these religious texts as definitive history. With that said, I am not going to be like the mainstream intellectuals and condemn anyone for what they believe. In my philosophy, you are free to believe anything you want, even if it is wrong or is not in lockstep with the mainstream. You should not be maligned and attacked, as the identity movements of any particular race or group are. If you disagree, state why and then go about your business. Everybody has to think for themselves. I think the reason identity movements, white, Black, or otherwise, are attacked is because they are saying, by default, that Jews are imposters, that Jews are not real Jews. In addition, they have some very critical views of Jews, some being outright anti-Semitic. In my philosophy, ideas are eternal. You cannot get rid of a concept in someone's head. Maybe or maybe not. You can change their mind, but most likely not. People are going to believe whatever they want to believe. It is not my job to police them or to tell them what they are to believe and think. They have their own minds, and they can do that for themselves. You are free to be wrong, and we all are wrong about something, sometime or another. I think most people do not understand what I call the logic of the religious. And if you do understand it, then you understand how the pious come to their way of thinking. and it does have a logic to it all. I do understand it, so I am much more compassionate, forgiving, and understanding of others. So, Pastor Emery is from the Christian Identity Movement, and part of understanding where he comes from is that the Bible is the Word of God, and that since the white Christians are of the lost tribes, they are still under God's Old Testament laws. And part of those laws would be the prohibition of usury, or the charging of any interest on debt. Now, I will not get into many of the fine points of this doctrines of the identity movement and the many things I think are flaws with it. I just want you to understand where Pastor Emery is coming from, and in that context, you can understand his quoting of scripture and some of his thought process, as you will see a lot of religious overtones. One thing Pastor Emery leaves out of this conversation is that usury was forbidden in the Old Testament, with a caveat. That is, that the ancient Israelites could charge interest on debt if it were to a foreigner or foreign nation, but not to a fellow Israelite. It would be like saying a white man cannot charge interest to a white person, but can to a black man, a Mexican, and so forth. In today's world, this would be considered racist. We have to remember the Bible was written by an ancient culture so far removed from ours. It bears little resemblance. In that time, tribalism was the norm, so a command of this type would fit into that cultural at that time. It was not that Jews were the only ones who were tribal, everyone was. I think Pastor Emery was saying that usury was not to be practiced anywhere or for anyone in America, regardless of ethnic or racial makeup. I want to take the religious side out of it and just address the issue of interest on debt. Just taking the title of Pastor Emery's booklet, Billions for the Bankers and Debts for the People, we have a truism here. Any observation of the facts of how things are before our very eyes, and we clearly see that indeed, the bankers have billions and the people have debts to those bankers. To get a better handle on what a billion is, let us convert it to seconds. 1 million equals 11.57 days, 1 billion equals 31.71 years, and the banks make billions every year. The 10 top banks in the world have over $25 trillion in assets, and 10 trillion is 32,000 years in seconds. Indeed, the money via interest makes billions, and the vast majority of us are not even millionaires. Do you see the disparity? This would have been true throughout history, where those loaning money at interest had great wealth and those borrowing had debts. I think this disparity is what created a sense of social outrage and prohibition of usury from both religious and secular sources. I think another reason this topic is taboo is because Jews were known to be moneylenders in early European history. And I think the discussion of this topic somehow gets tied back to this issue and is seen at some level as anti-Semitic. Of course, Jews are not the only ones lending at interest. Nevertheless, Jews and money lending have a complex history and goes way back. Jews were not allowed to enter many trades, and the nobles allowed them to loan money. So there is indeed a complex history here. I will not be getting into here. I just want to say why I think this topic is ignored by the mainstream, and I think there is a fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. I think the topic needs to be decoupled from religion and anti-Semitism and just dealt with on the facts. And the fact there is a glaring truth, one anyone can see with their own eyes, that wealth is transferred to the lenders while the people endure debt, and sometimes ruin has to be addressed. This could not be clearer with payday lenders of today. Imagine what life would be like if you did not have to pay all the interest on debt. How much more money would you have? How much quicker would you get out of debt? Would it be better for you economically? Would you have more money to save and invest? Would the people be richer? How many other things could you image being better? Think on these things. I personally think there are other issues with banking, such as the many predatory yet legal acts they engage in to fleece the populace that has nothing to do with usury. Of course, all justified by our high and mighty far and wide. Banking has a place, and it is not to fleece its customers, which it does. No one in the mainstream is dealing with the topic. No great minds at the universities, not the press, not the politicians, not the philosophers, not the economists. So who is left to deal with it? Only the radicals. I can decouple their many various views on everything and just look at the topic of usury by itself, and I think there is something here worth considering, worth thinking about, worth addressing. And I think it's going to be hard to defend usury. And like I said, I am always here, and the great ones, the high and mighty, are welcome to prove me wrong. One thing I have learned about the high and mighty is that with all that greatness, they can still be wrong and often are. But I am not holding my breath, waiting for a response. So I want you, the listener, to think about it for yourself. And I highly recommend you read a book called The Truth in Money. Sincerely and Godspeed, Good Medicine reveals nations can be conquered by the use of one or more of three methods. The most common is conquest by war. In time, though, this method usually fails because the captives hate the captors and rise up and drive them out if they can. Much force is needed to maintain control, making it expensive for the conquering nation. A second method is by religion, where men are convinced they must give their captors part of their earning as obedience to God. Such a captivity is vulnerable to philosophical exposure or by overthrow by armed force, since religion by its nature lacks military force to regain control once its captives become disillusioned. The third method can be called economic conquest. It takes place when nations are placed under tribute without the use of visible force or coercion, so that the victims do not realize they have been conquered. Tribute is collected from them in the form of legal debts and taxes, and they believe they are paying it for their own good, for the good of others, or to protect all from some enemy. Their captors become their benefactors and protectors. Although this is the slowest to impose, it is often quite long-lasting, as the captives do not see any military force arrayed against them. Their religion is left more or less intact, they have freedom to speak and to travel, and they participate in elections for their rulers. Without realizing it, they are conquered, and the instruments of their own society are used to transfer their wealth to their captors and make the conquest complete. In 1900, the average American worker paid few taxes and had little debt. Last year, payments on debts and taxes took more than half of what he earned. Is it possible a form of conquest has been imposed on our people? Read the following pages and decide for yourself. And may God have mercy on this once debt-free and great nation in Christ. Billions for the bankers, debts for the people. The Real Story of the Money Control Over America by Pastor Sheldon Emery. Americans, living in what is called the richest nation on earth, seem always to be short of money. Wives are working in unprecedented numbers. Husbands hope for overtime hours to earn more, or take part-time jobs evenings and weekends. Children look for odd jobs for spending money. The family debt climbs higher. And psychologists say one of the biggest causes of family quarrels and breakups is arguments over money. Much of this trouble can be traced to our present debt-money system. Too few Americans realize why Christian statesmen wrote into Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. They did this, as we will show, in prayerful hope it would prevent love of money from destroying the republic they had founded. We shall see how subversion of Article 1 has brought on us the evil of which God's word had warned. Money is man's only creation. Economists use the term create when speaking of the process by which money comes into existence. Now, creation means making something that did not exist before. Lumbermen make boards from trees, workers build houses from lumber, and factories manufacture automobiles from metal, glass, and other materials. But in all these, they did not create. They only changed existing materials into a more usable and therefore more valuable form. This is not so with money. Here and here alone, man actually creates something out of nothing. A piece of paper of little value is printed so that it is worth a piece of lumber. With different figures, it can buy the automobile or even the house. Its value has been created in the true meaning of the word. Money, creating profitable. As is seen by the above, money is very cheap to make, and whoever does the creating of money in a nation can make a tremendous profit. Builders work hard to make a profit of 5% above cost to build a house. Automakers sell their cars for 1 to 2% above the cost of manufacture, and it is considered good business. But money manufacturers have no limit on their profits, since a few cents will print a $1 bill or a $10,000 bill. That profit is part of our story, but first let us consider another unique characteristic of the thing: money, the love of which is the root of all evil. An adequate supply of money needed. An adequate supply of money is indispensable to civilized society. We could forego many other things, but without money, industry would grind to a halt. Farms would become only self-sustaining units. Surplus food would disappear. Jobs requiring the work of more than one man or one family would remain undone. Shipping and large movements of goods would cease. Hungry people would plunder and kill to remain alive. And all government except family or tribe would cease to function. An overstatement, you say? Not at all. Money is the blood of civilized society, the means of all commercial trade, except simple barter. It is the measure and the instrument by which one product is sold and another purchased. Remove money, or even reduce the supply below that which is necessary to carry on current levels of trade, and the results are catastrophic. For an example, we need only look at America's depression of the early 1930s. The bankers' depression of the 1930s. In 1930, America did not lack industrial capacity, fertile farmland, skilled and willing workers, or industrious farm families. It had an extensive and highly efficient transportation system in railroads, road networks, and inland and ocean waterways. Communications between regions and localities were the best in the world, utilizing telephone, teletype, radio, and a well-operated government mail system. No war had ravaged the cities or the countryside, no pestilence weakened the population, nor had famine stalked the land. The United States of America in 1930 lacked only one thing: an adequate supply of money to carry on trade and commerce. In the early 1930s, bankers, the only source of new money and credit, deliberately refused loans to industries, stores, and farms. Payments on existing loans were required, however, and money rapidly disappeared from circulation. Goods were available to be purchased, jobs waiting to be done, but the lack of money brought the nation to a standstill. By this simple ploy, America was put in a depression, and the greedy bankers took possession of hundreds of thousands of farms, homes, and business properties. The people were told, times are hard, and money is short. Not understanding the system, they were cruelly robbed of their earnings, their savings, and their property. Money for peace? No. Money for war? Yes. World War II ended the Depression. The same bankers who in the early 30s had no loans for peacetime houses, food, and clothing suddenly had unlimited billions to lend for army barracks, K-rations, and uniforms. A nation that in 1934 couldn't produce food for sale suddenly could produce bombs to send free to Germany and Japan. More on this riddle later. With the sudden increase in money, people were hired, farms sold their produce, factories went to 2 shifts, mines reopened, and the Great Depression was over. Some politicians were blamed for it, and others took credit for ending it. The truth is, the lack of money, caused by the bankers, brought on the Depression, and adequate money ended it. The people were never told that simple truth, and in this article we will endeavor to show how these same bankers who control our money and credit have used their control to plunder America and place us in bondage. Power to coin and regulate money. When we can see the disastrous results of an artificially created shortage of money, we can better understand why our founding fathers, who understood both money and God's laws, insisted on placing the power to create money and the power to control it only in the hands of the federal Congress. They believed that all citizens should share in the profits of its creation, and therefore the national government must be the only creator of money. They further believed that all citizens, of whatever state or territory or station in life, would benefit by an adequate and stable currency, and therefore the national government must also be, by law, the only controller of the value of money. Since the federal Congress was the only legislative body subject to all the citizens at the ballot box, it was, to their minds, the only safe depository of so much profit and so much power. They wrote it out in the simple but all-inclusive: Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. How the people lost control to the Federal Reserve. Instead of the constitutional method of creating our money and putting it into circulation, we now have an entirely unconstitutional system. This has resulted in almost disastrous conditions, as we shall see. Since our money was handled both legally and illegally before 1932, you shall consider only the years following 1913s. And so from that year on, all of our money has been created and issued by an illegal method that will eventually destroy the United States if it is not changed. Prior to 1913, America was a prosperous, powerful, and growing nation at peace with its neighbors and the envy of the world. But in December of 1913, Congress, with many members away for the Christmas holidays, passed what has since been known as the Federal Reserve Act. For the full story of how this infamous legislation was forced through our Congress, read Conquest or Consent by W.B. Prosody Res 7 Venard. Omitting the burdensome details, it simply authorized the establishment of a Federal Reserve Corporation with a board of directors, the Federal Reserve Board, to run it, and the United States was divided into 12 Federal Reserve districts. This simple but terrible law completely removed from Congress the right to create money or to have any control over its creation, and gave that function to the Federal Reserve Corporation. This was done with appropriate fanfare and propaganda that this would remove money from politics. They didn't say, and therefore from the people's control, and prevent boom and bust from hurting our citizens. The people were not told then, and most still do not know today, that the Federal Reserve Corporation is a private corporation controlled by bankers, and therefore is operated for the financial gain of the bankers over the people, rather than for the good of the people. The word federal was used only to deceive the people. Since that day of infamy, more disastrous to us than Pearl Harbor, the small group of privileged people who lend us our money have accrued to themselves all of the profits of printing our money and more. Since 1913, they have created tens of billions of dollars in money and credit, which, as their own personal property, they then lend to our government and our people at interest. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer had become the secret policy of our national government. An example of the process of creation and its conversion to people's debt will aid our understanding. They print it, we borrow it, and pay them interest. We shall start with the need for money. The federal government, having spent more than it has taken from its citizens in taxes, needs, for the sake of illustration, $1 billion. Since it does not have the money and Congress has given away its authority to create it, the government must go to the creators for the $1 billion. But the Federal Reserve, a private corporation, doesn't just give its money away. The bankers are willing to deliver $1 billion in money or credit to the federal government in exchange for the government's agreement to pay it back with interest. So Congress authorizes the Treasury Department to print $1 billion in U.S. bonds, which are then delivered to the Federal Reserve bankers. The Federal Reserve then pays the cost of printing the $1,000, about $1, and makes the exchange. The government then uses the money to pay its obligations. What are the results of this fantastic transaction? Well, $1 billion in government bills are paid, all right? But the government has now indebted the people to the bankers for $1 billion, on which the people must pay interest. Tens of thousands of such transactions have taken place since 1913s, so that by the 1980s, the U.S. government is indebted to the bankers for over $1,000 trillion, on which the people pay over $100 billion a year in interest alone, with no hope of ever paying off the principal. Supposedly, our children and following generations will pay forever and forever. Since this book was printed in 1984, the national debt has grown to today's 1989 total of approximately $3 trillion. And there's more. You say this is terrible. Yes, it is, but we have shown only part of the sordid story. Under this unholy system, those United States bonds have now become assets of the banks in the reserve system, which they then use as reserves to create more credit to lend. Current reserve requirements allow them to use that $1 billion in bonds to create as much as $15 billion in new credit to lend to states, municipalities, to individuals and businesses. Added to the original $1 billion, they could have $16 billion of created credit out in loans paying them interest, with their only cost being $1,000 for printing the original $1 billion. Since the U.S. Congress has not issued constitutional money since 1863, over 100 years, in order for the people to have money to carry on trade and commerce, they are forced to borrow the created credit of the monopoly bankers and pay them usury interest. And there's still more. In addition to the vast wealth drawn to them through this almost unlimited usury, the bankers who control the money at the top are able to approve or disapprove large loans to large and successful corporations to the extent that refusal of a loan will bring about a reduction in the price that corporation's stock sells for on the market. After depressing the price, the bankers' agents buy large blocks of the stock, after which the sometimes multi-million-dollar loan is approved, the stock rises, and is then sold for a profit. In this manner, billions of dollars are made with which to buy more stock. This practice is so refined today that the Federal Reserve Board need only announce to the newspapers an increase or decrease in their rediscount rate to send stocks up and down as they wish. Using this method since 1913, the bankers and their agents have purchased secret or open control of almost every large corporation in America. Using that control, they then force the corporations to borrow huge sums from their banks so that corporation earnings are siphoned off in the form of interest to the banks. This leaves little as actual profits, which can be paid as dividends, and explains why stock prices are so depressed, while the banks reap billions in interest from corporate loans. In effect, the bankers get almost all of the profits, while individual stockholders are left holding the bag. The millions of working families of America are now indebted to the few thousand banking families for twice the assessed value of the entire United States. And these banking families obtained that debt against us for the cost of paper, ink, and bookkeeping. The interest amount is never created. The only way new money, which is not true money, but is credit, representing a debt, goes into circulation in America is when it is borrowed from bankers. When the state and people borrow large sums, we seem to prosper. However, the bankers create only the amount of the principal of each loan, never the extra amount needed to pay the interest. Therefore, the new money never equals the new debt added. The amounts needed to pay the interest on loans is not created, and therefore does not exist. Under this kind of a system, where new debt always exceeds the new money no matter how much or how little is borrowed, the total debt increasingly outstrips the amount of money available to pay the debt. The people can never, ever get out of debt. An example will show the viciousness of this usury debt system with its built-in shortage of money. If $60,000 is borrowed, $260,000 must be paid back. When a citizen goes to a banker to borrow $60,000 to purchase a home or a farm, the bank clerk has the borrower agree to pay back the loan plus interest. At 14% interest for 30 years, the borrower must agree to pay $710.92 per month for a total of $255,931.20. The clerk then requires the citizen to assign to the banker the right of ownership of the property if the borrower does not make the required payments. The bank clerk then gives the borrower a $60,000 check or a $60,000 deposit slip, crediting the borrower's checking account with $60,000. The borrower then writes checks to the builder, subcontractors, etc., who in turn write checks. $60,000 of new checkbook money is thereby added to money in circulation. However, and this is the fatal flaw in a usury system, the only new money created and put into circulation is the amount of the loan, $60,000. The money to pay the interest is not created, and therefore was not added to money in circulation. Even so, this borrower, and those who follow him in ownership of the property, must earn and take out of circulation $255,931, almost $200,000 more than he put in circulation when he borrowed the original $60,000. By the way, it is this interest which cheats all families out of nicer homes. It is not that they can't afford them. It is because the banker's usury forces them to pay for 4 homes to get one. Every new loan puts the same process in operation. Each borrower adds a small sum to the total money supply when he borrows, but the payments on the loan, because of interest, then deduct a much larger sum form the total money supply. There is therefore no way all debtors can pay off the money lenders. As they pay the principal and interest, the money in circulation disappears. All they can do is struggle against each other, borrowing more and more from the moneylenders each generation. The moneylenders, bankers, who produce nothing of value, slowly, then more rapidly, gain a death grip on the land, building, and the present and future earnings of the whole working population. Proverbs 22:7 has come to pass in America. The borrowers have become the servants of the lenders. No wonder God Almighty forbids interest on loans. Small loans do the same thing. If you haven't quite grasped the impact of the above, let us consider a small auto loan for 3 years at 18% interest. Step 1. Citizen borrows $5,000 and pays it into circulation. It goes to the dealer, factory, miner, etc., and signs a note agreeing to pay the banker $6,500. Step 2. Citizen pays $180 per month of his earnings to the banker. In 3 years, he will take out of circulation $1,500 more than he put in circulation. Every loan of banker created money, credit, causes the same thing to happen. Since this has happened millions of times since 1913 and continues today, you can see why America has gone from a prosperous, debt-free nation to a debt-ridden nation where practically every home, farm, and business is paying usury tribute to some banker. The usury tribute to the bankers on personal, local, state, and federal debt totals more than the combined earnings of 25% of the working people. Soon, it will be 50% and continue upward. This is why bankers prosper in good times or bad. In the millions of transactions made each year like those above, little actual currency changes hands, nor is it necessary that it do so. 95% of all cash transactions in the U.S. are by check, so the banker is perfectly safe in creating that so-called loan by writing the check or deposit slip, not against actual money, but against your promise to pay it back. The cost to him is paper, ink, and a few dollars in salaries and office costs for each transaction. It is check kiting on an enormous scale. The profits increase rapidly year after year, as shown below. The cost to you? Eventually, everything. In 1910, the U.S. federal debt was only $1 billion, or $12.40 per citizen. State and local debts were practically non-existent. By 1920, after only 6 years of Federal Reserve shenanigans, the federal debt had jumped to $24 billion, or $228 per person, and state and local debts were mushrooming. By 1981, the federal debt passed $1 trillion and was growing exponentially as the bankers tripled the interest rates. State and local debts are now more than the federal, and with business and personal debts totaled over $6 trillion, 3 times the value of all land and buildings in America. If we signed over to the moneylenders all of America, we would still owe them 2 more Americas, plus their usury, of course. However, they are too cunning to take title to everything. They will instead leave you with some illusion of ownership, so you and your children will continue to work and pay the bankers more of your earnings on ever-increasing debts. The establishment has captured our people with their ungodly system of usury and debt as certainly as if they had marched in with a uniformed army. To understand that it really is a conquest, go back to the front and read the 3 types of conquest again. The borrower must pay back more than he borrowed, so bankers always get more than they lend. For the gamblers among my readers, to grasp the truth that periodic withdrawal of money through interest payments will inexorably transfer all wealth in the nation to the receiver of interest, imagine yourself in a poker or dice game where everyone must buy the chips, the medium of exchange, from a banker who does not risk chips in the game, but watches the table and every hour reaches in and takes 10% to 15% of all the chips on the table. As the game goes on, the amount of chips in the possession of each player will go up and down with his luck. However, the total number of chips available to play the game, carry on trade and business, will decrease rapidly. The game will get low on chips and some will run out. If they want to continue to play, they must buy or borrow them from the banker. The banker will lend them only if the player signs a mortgage, agreeing to give the banker some real property, car, home, farm, business, etc., if he cannot make periodic payments to pay back all of the chips plus some extra ones, interest. The payments must be made on time, whether he wins, makes a profit, or not. It is easy to see that no matter how skillfully they play, eventually the banker will end up with all of his original chips back. And except for the very best players, the rest, if they stay in long enough, will lose to the banker. Their homes, their farms, their businesses, perhaps even their cars, watches, rings, and the shirts off their backs. Our real-life situation is much worse than any poker game. In a poker game, none is forced to go into debt, and anyone can quit at any time and keep whatever he still has. But in real life, even if we borrow little ourselves from the bankers, the local, state, and federal governments borrow billions in our name, squander it, then confiscate our earnings from us and pay it back to the bankers with interest. We are forced to play the game, and none can leave except by death. We pay as long as we live, and our children pay after we die. If we cannot pay, the same government sends the police to take our property and give it to the bankers. The bankers risk nothing in the game. They just collect their percentage and win it AIL. In Las Vegas and at other gambling centers, all games are rigged to pay the owner a percentage, and they rake in millions. The Federal Reserve Bankers' game is also rigged, and it pays off in billions. In recent years, bankers added real cards to their game. Credit cards are promoted as a convenience and a great boon to trade. Actually, they are ingenious devices by which bankers collect 2 to 5% of every retail sale from the seller and 18% interest from buyers. A real stacked deck. Yes, it's political too. Democrat, Republican, and independent voters who have wondered why politicians always spend more tax money than they take in should now see the reason. When they begin to study our debt money system, they soon realize that these politicians are not the agents of the people, but are the agents of the bankers, for whom they plan ways to place the people further in debt. It takes only a little imagination to see that if Congress had been creating and spending or issuing into circulation the necessary increase in the money supply, there would be no national debt, and the over $4 trillion of other debts would be practically non-existent. Since there would be no original cost of money except printing, and no continuing costs such as interest, federal taxes would be almost nil. Money, once in circulation, would remain there and go on serving its purpose as a medium of exchange for generation after generation and century after century, just as coins do now, with no payments to the bankers whatever, mounting debts and wars. But instead of peace and debt-free prosperity, we have ever-mounting debt and periodic wars. We as a people are now ruled by a system of banker-owned mammon that has usurped the mantle of government, disguised itself as our legitimate government, and set about to pauperize and control our people. It is now a centralized, all-powerful political apparatus whose main purposes are promoting war, spending the people's money, and propagandizing to perpetuate itself in power. Our two large political parties have become its servants, the various departments of government, its spending agencies, and the Internal Revenue, its collection agency. Unknown to the people, it operates in close cooperation with similar apparatuses in other nations, which are also disguised as governments. Some, we are told, are friends. Some, we are told, are enemies. Enemies are built up through international manipulations and used to frighten the American people into going billions of dollars more into debt to the bankers for military preparedness, foreign aid to stop communism, minority rights, etc. Citizens, deliberately confused by brainwashing propaganda, watch helplessly while our politicians give our food, goods, and money to banker-controlled alien governments under the guise of better relations and easing tensions. Our banker-controlled government takes our finest and bravest sons and sends them into foreign wars with obsolete equipment and inadequate training, where tens of thousands are murdered and hundreds of thousands are crippled. Other thousands are morally corrupted, addicted to drugs, and infected with venereal and other diseases, which they bring back to the United States. When the war is over, We have gained nothing, but are scores of billions of dollars more in debt to the bankers, which was the reason for the war in the first place. And there's more. The profits from these massive debts have been used to erect a complete and almost hidden economic and political colossus over our nation. They keep telling us they are trying to do us good, when in truth they work to bring harm and injury to our people. These would-be despots know it is easier to control and rob an ill, poorly educated, and confused people than it is a healthy and intelligent population, so they deliberately prevent real cures for diseases. They degrade our educational systems, and they stir up social and racial unrest. For the same reason they favor drug use, alcohol, racial intermarriage, sexual promiscuity, abortion, pornography, and crime. Everything which debilitates the minds and bodies of the people is secretly encouraged, as it makes the people less able to oppose them or even to understand what is being done to them. Family, morals, love of country, the Christian religion, all that is honorable is being swept away while they try to build their new subservient man. Our new rulers are trying to change our whole racial, social, religious, and political order, but they will not change the debt money economic system by which they rob and rule. Our people have become tenants and debt slaves to the bankers and their agents in the land our fathers conquered. It is conquest through the most gigantic fraud and swindle in the history of mankind. And we remind you again, the key to their wealth and power over us is their ability to create money out of nothing and lend it to us at interest. If they had not been allowed to do that, they would never have gained secret control of our nation. How true Solomon's words are, the rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. Proverbs 22:7. God Almighty warned in the Bible that one of the curses which would come upon his people for disobeying his laws was, "The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail." Deut. 28:44-45. Most of the owners of the largest banks in America are of Eastern European ancestry and connected with the Rothschild European banks. Has that warning come to fruition in America? Let us now consider the correct method of providing the medium of exchange, money, needed by our people. The constitutional way, every citizen a stockholder. Mem%. If we would have used the constitutional way of creating the money needed in the nation, the federal Congress would spend most of its time and study on the issuance and control of an adequate supply of stable money for the people. If an increase of population and production required an increase in the medium of exchange, Congress would authorize the coining, printing, of the determined amount. Some could be used to pay current, legitimate expenses of the federal government, with the balance paid directly to the citizens. Records for payment would be similar to Social Security records, except a citizen would be recorded at birth instead of when he first goes to work. Each person on the records, as of the date of the congressional authorization, would receive an equal amount, just as if he were a stockholder holding one share. Just think, a payment of only $20 to each citizen would put $4 billion of debt-free and interest-free money into circulation. Such a suggestion always scares the bankers. Their propagandists will immediately cry, "printing press money," and warn that it would soon be worthless and would cause inflation. The truth is their immense usury charges on their created credit, our debt, is the sole cause of inflation. All prices on all industry, trade, and labor must be raised periodically to pay the ever-increasing usury charges. That is the only cause of higher prices, and the money changers spend millions in propaganda to keep you from realizing that. The money creators, bankers, know that if we ever tried a constitutional issue of debt-free, interest-free currency, even a limited issue, the benefits would be apparent immediately, that they must prevent. Abraham Lincoln was the last president to issue such debt-free and interest-free currency in 1863, and he was assassinated shortly thereafter. No bankers plunder. Under a constitutional system, no private banks would exist to rob the people. Government banks under the control of the people's representatives would issue and control all money and credit. They would issue not only actual currency, but could lend limited credit at no interest for the purchase of capital goods such as homes. A $60,000 loan would require only $60,000 repayment, not $255,931 as it is now. Everyone who supplied materials and labor for the home would get paid just as they do today, but the bankers would not get $195,931 in usury. And that is why they ridicule and destroy anyone suggesting government money without interest and without debt. History tells us of debt-free and interest-free money issued by governments. The American colonies did it in the 1700s, and their wealth soon rivaled England and brought restrictions from Parliament, which led to the Revolutionary War. Abraham Uncoin did it in 1863 to help finance the Civil War. He was later assassinated by an agent of the Rothschild Bank. No debt-free or interest-free money has been issued in America since then. Several Arab nations issue interest-free loans to their citizens today. The Saracen Empire forbade interest on money for 1,000 years, and its wealth outshone even Saxon Europe. Mandarin China issued its own money, interest-free and debt-free, and historians and collectors of art today consider those centuries to be China's time of greatest wealth, culture, and peace. Germany issued debt-free and interest-free money from 1935 and on, accounting for its startling rise from the Depression to a world power in 5 years. Germany financed its entire government and war operation from 1935 to 1945 without gold and without debt, and it took the whole capitalist and communist world to destroy the German power over Europe and bring Europe back under the heel of the bankers. Such history of money does not even appear in the textbooks of public schools today. Issuing money, which doesn't have to be paid back in interest, leaves the money available to use in the exchange of goods and services, and its only continuing cost is replacement as the paper wears out. Money is the paper ticket by which such transfers are made and should always be in sufficient quantity to transfer all possible production of the nation to ultimate consumers. It is as ridiculous for a nation to say to its citizens, "You must consume less because we are short of money," as it would be for an airline to say, "Our planes are flying, but we can't take you because we are short of tickets." Stable money. Money issued in such a way would derive its value in exchange from the fact that it had come from the highest legal source in the nation and would be declared to be legal to pay all public and private debts. Issued by a sovereign nation, not in danger of collapse, it would need no gold or silver or other so-called precious metals to back it. As history shows, the stability and responsibility of the government issuing it is the deciding factor in the acceptance of that government's currency, not gold, silver, or iron buried in some hole in the ground. Proof is America's currency today. Our gold and silver are practically gone, but our currency is accepted. But if the government was about to collapse, our currency would be worthless. Also, money issued through the people's legitimate government would not be under the control of a privately owned corporation whose individual owners benefit by causing the money amount and value to fluctuate and the people to go into debt. Under the present debt usury system, the extra burden of usury forces workers and businesses to demand more money for the work and goods to pay their ever-increasing debts and taxes. This increase in prices and wages is called inflation. Bankers, politicians, and economists blame it on everything but the real cause, which is the usury levied on money and debt by the bankers. This inflation benefits the moneylenders, since it wipes out savings of one generation so they cannot finance or help the next generation, who must then borrow from the moneylenders and pay a large part of their life's labor to the usurer. With an adequate supply of interest-free money, little borrowing would be required, and prices would be established by people and goods, not by debts and usury. Citizen control. If the federal Congress failed to act or acted wrongly in the supply of money, the citizens would use the ballot or recall Petteltlan to replace those who prevented correct action with others whom the people believe would pursue a better money policy. The creation of money and its issuance in sufficient quantity would be one of the few functions of Congress. The voter could decide on a candidate by his stand on money, instead of the hundreds of, and deliberately confusing subjects which are presented to Congress today. And since money is and would remain a national function, local differences or local factions would not be able to away the people from the nation's citizens' interest. All other problems, except the nation's defense, would be taken care of in the state, county, or city governments where they are best handled and easily corrected. An adequate national defense would be provided by the citizen-controlled Congress, and there would be no bankers behind the scenes bribing politicians to give $200 billion of military equipment to other nations, disarming us while alien nations prepare to attack and invade the United States of America. Why you haven't known. We realize this small and necessarily incomplete article on money may be charged with oversimplification. Some may say that if it is that simple, the people would have known about it, and it could not have happened. But this money-lenders' conspiracy is as old as Babylon, and even in America, it dates far back before the year 1913. Actually, 1913 may be considered the year in which their previous plans came to fruition, and the way opened for complete economic conquest of our people. The conspiracy is old enough in America so that its agents have been for many years in positions of influence, such as newspaper publishers, editors, columnists, church ministers, university presidents, professors, textbook writers, labor union leaders, movie makers, radio and TV commentators, politicians, and from school board members to U.S. presidents and many others. Controlled news and information. These agents control the information available to our people. They manipulate public opinion, elect whom they will locally and nationally, and never expose the crooked money system. They promote school bonds, municipal bonds, expensive and detrimental farm programs, urban renewal, foreign aid, and many other schemes which will put the people more into debt to the bankers. Thoughtful citizens wonder why billions are spent on one program and billions on another, which may duplicate it or even nullify it, such as paying some farmers not to raise crops, while at the same time building dams or canals to irrigate more farmland. Crazy or stupid? Neither. The goal is more debt. Thousands of government-sponsored ways to waste money go on continually. Most make no sense, but they are never exposed for what they really are. Builders of billions for the bankers and debts for the people. So-called economic experts write syndicated columns in hundreds of newspapers, craftily designed to prevent the people from learning the simple truth about our money system. Commentators on radio and LV, preachers, educators, and politicians blame the people as wasteful, lazy, or spendthrift, and blame the workers and consumers for the increase in debts and the inflation of prices, when they know the cause is the debt money system itself. Our people are literally drowned in charges and countercharges designed to confuse them and keep them from understanding the unconstitutional and evil money system that is so efficiently and silently robbing the farmers, the workers, and the businessmen of the fruits of their labors and of their freedoms. When some few patriotic people or organizations who know the truth begin to expose them or try to stop any of their mad schemes, they are ridiculed and smeared as right-wing extremists, super patriots, ultra-rightists, bigots, racists, even fascists, and anti-Semites. Any name is used which will cause them to shut up or will at least stop other people from listening to the warning they are giving. Articles and books such as you are now reading are kept out of schools, libraries, and bookstores. Some, who are especially vocal in their exposure of the treason against our people, are harassed by government agencies such as the EPA, OSHA, the IRS, and others, causing them financial loss or bankruptcy. Using the above methods, they have been completely successful in preventing most Americans from learning the things you have read in this pamphlet. However, in spite of their control of information, they realize many citizens are learning the truth. Therefore, to prevent violence or armed resistance to their plunder of America, they plan to register all firearms and eventually to disarm all citizens. They have to eliminate most guns, except those in the hands to their government, police, and army. Tell the people. The almost hidden conspirators in politics, religion, education, entertainment, and the news media are working for a banker-owned United States in a banker-owned world under a banker-owned world government. Love of country, compassion for your race, and concern for your children should make you deeply interested in this, America's greatest problem, for our generation has not suffered under the yoke as the coming generations will. Usury and taxes will continue to take a larger and larger part of the annual earnings of the people and put them into the pockets of the bankers and their political agents. Increasing government regulations will prevent citizen protest and opposition to their control. Is it possible that your grandchildren will own neither home nor car, but will live in government-owned apartments and ride to work in government-owned buses, both paying usury to the bankers, and be allowed to keep just enough of their earnings to buy a minimum of food and clothing while their rulers wallow in luxury? In Asia and Eastern Europe, it is called communism. In America, it is called democracy and capitalism. America will not shake off her banker-controlled dictatorship as long as the people are ignorant of the hidden controllers. International financiers who control most of the governments of the nations and most sources of information seem to have us completely within their grasp. They are afraid of only one thing: an awakened patriotic citizenry, armed with the truth and with a trust in Almighty God for deliverance. This pamphlet has given you the truth about their iniquitous system. What you do with it is in your hands, as in the hands of divine providence. The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. Proverbs 29:25. May Jesus Christ both enlighten and have mercy on America. Audit the Federal Reserve SVSTEM. The Federal Reserve has never been audited by the government since it took over our money and credit in 1913. In 1975, a bill, H.R. 4316, to require an audit was introduced in Congress. During the April 1975 hearings, this author submitted a statement favoring the audit, as did many others. It is reprinted on the next 2 pages from page 306 to 308 of the 739 pages of testimony given during those hearings before the Subcommittee on Domestic Monetary Policy of the Committee on Banking, Currency, and Housing, House of Representatives. Due to pressure from the money controllers, it was not passed. No audit has ever been made. Statement of Pastor Sheldon Emery, Phoenix, Aries. Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee, I am a minister of the gospel with some years of experience in business before entering the ministry. I believe most of you men have had some business experience, and I know you are ministers. For my Bible says in Romans 13 that the civil rulers are the ministers of God to thee for good. Paul continued in verse 4 that the ruler is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. During the last years, you men have been increasingly employed in studying and trying to solve an array of problems, many of which are called evils, and all of which have to do with money and economics. Although we do not all agree on the exact definition or on their effect on the total economy, we are becoming increasingly familiar with such terms as currency, money, coin, credit, borrowing, securities, circulation, bonds, debt, interest, usury, mortgages, inflation, deflation, recession, depression, impoundments, foreclosure, and another score of terms which enter any discussion of the American monetary system or American economics. John Adams, one of the founders of this republic, once wrote, during the difficulties attending the birth of our beloved nation, that all of the perplexities, confusion, and distress in America arises not from the defects of the Constitution or Confederation, not from want of honor or virtue, so much as from downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit, and circulation. I believe it is safe to say that most of the confusion and the distress of America 2 centuries after Adams still arises, in great part, from the same ignorance. American economic history is the record of ups and downs of prosperity and stagnation, although we have continued a general trend of increased population, increased size of the nation, and increased production and standard of living. In the 1800s, we had a number of money or economic panics or disasters, in which thousands lost a part or all of their accrued possessions because of bank or money failures. Pressure increased for monetary reform. The problem of an adequate and at the same time stable medium of exchange for our expanding nation was not solved in the 1800s. But in 1913, your predecessors enacted the Federal Reserve Act, creating the Federal Reserve System to be governed by a board of governors called the Federal Reserve Board, and many hoped our money problems were solved. By that act, the elected representatives of the people delegated to the Federal Reserve Board both the authority and responsibility to control through its actions and policies the amount of money in circulation, the amount of credit available, and in general, the terms of the annual interest percentages, and through all of that to influence the actual value of the American dollar itself. That Congress seems to have intended to retain a position in relation to the Federal Reserve System, and board of what we would call master and servant seems clear, with the Federal Reserve and its member banks to be somewhat subservient to the wishes of its creator, while the Federal Reserve System served as the overseer of the nation's banking system. As you men know, succeeding Congresses have ascribed to this line of thought and action to a greater or lesser extent. There have been continual statements over the years that the Federal Reserve Board and system is an independent agency, not dependent on politics, and therefore not subject to political pressures. But in the final analysis, no one has denied but that the Federal Reserve Board and system is the creation of the U.S. Congress. Congress is the creator. The Federal Reserve Board is the creation. In John 13:16, Jesus Christ said to his disciples, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord." In Hebrews 3:3, Moses is commended for being faithful in all his house as a servant. It seems clear to me, and I believe to the members of this Committee of Congress, that the master-servant relationship of the United States Congress and the Federal Reserve Board and system was not intended to change. And while that master-servant relationship remained, the Federal Reserve Board, and with its member banks, were to be the nation's money and credit managers. They were the financial and trust officers of the U.S. corporation, as it were. They were to be the nation's bookkeeper. In 1913, when this master-servant relationship began, the U.S. federal debt, as accumulated by previous Congresses, stood at about $2 billion, or 13 per capita. By the end of 1920, after 7 years, the federal debt was over $24 billion, or over $200 per capita. By the end of 1940, the federal debt was over $280 billion, or $1,500 per American citizen, and by 1975 is approaching $500 billion, or over $2,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. In addition to this, the American people, who were practically debt-free in their homes, farms, and personal possessions, now are the debtors, through personal debt and through local and state government agencies, for an amount approaching $2.5 trillion, or more than $50,000 for the family of 5 in America. And it is rising several billion each year. I do not have the exact and up-to-date figures on all of this, but I am sure they are available from the Federal Reserve Board, since it is a part of their duties as the controller and bookkeeper of the nation's money and economy to keep such records. In simple terms, gentlemen, we have a situation where the master, or the employer, the United States of America and its people, is in debt to the point of bankrupt, with more debt bondage added daily, with its business activity decreasing, its prestige and power disappearing, and foreclosure a future possibility. And the servant, the employee, the corporation's bookkeeper and manager, if you please, taking possession through its member banks of the choicest farms, the businesses, and the natural resources of the nation. The members of the servant's family, member banks, are able to buy land and build skyscrapers on the expensive downtown properties of all our major cities. They are able to lend to us in return for our municipal bonds, sewer bonds, school bonds, street bonds, civic center bonds, highway bonds, and scores of other bonds. And every few weeks they will lend the master in Washington, D.C., at interest, of course, a few billion or many billion, as long as they receive in exchange a further promise of payment of more of the labor and property of the present and future generations of the citizens of the nation. Gentlemen, if any of you were on the board of directors of a growing and profitable company in 1913, and you hired a combination financial consultant, credit manager, portfolio controller, presidential advisor, and creator of company funds, and after 60 years of his advice, policies, control, and bookkeeping, you found your company was broke and on the verge of collapse, and the servants, relatives, and friends were so wealthy, they were buying up much of the company. Gentlemen, you would audit the books, or you would not deserve to be on the ruling board of that corporation, much less to be princes and elders in the greatest nation of all history. My fellow Americans, Solomon wrote 3,000 years ago, the borrower is servant of the lender. 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, ye cannot serve God and mammon. Gentlemen, we are near the end of an age. God, in his mercy, has made America great and has blessed her and her people above all other people upon the face of the earth. You are his ministers, and you have the responsibility to quit yourselves like men, to fulfill your authority as ministers of God to the people for their good. If you do not, America will continue her present course toward a certain disaster, and God, who has proclaimed his own certain future rule over all of the kingdoms of this earth, will at a future date, soon I pray, raise up other men in this nation of destiny to do that which must be done to release his people from bondage. On our hallowed Liberty Bell are these words from the Bible: proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. The rest of verse 10 of Leviticus 25 reads, it shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and you shall return every man unto his family. Not liberty from a foreign army, nor from a threatening neighbor, but liberty from the fear of and the actual loss of his possessions and his family. Your predecessors, about 15 years ago, placed one of those Liberty Bells in every state capital in America. Gentlemen, your courage and your intelligence to act now in the face of opposition, to find out why it is that every working man and farmer in America must live in fear of losing his possessions and his family to a devouring money and economic system, may well make America's way into the new age much easier and much more in line with the will of the God who made us. We are promised that in the kingdom age, every man will sit under his own vine and under his own fig tree, and I can assure you it will not be mortgaged to the bankers. May Jesus Christ guide and bless your deliberations and decisions for our people and our nation. Famous quotes. President James A. Garfield: whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. Horace Greeley: while boasting of our noble deeds, we are careful to conceal the ugly fact that by an iniquitous money system, we have nationalized a system of oppression which, though more refined, is not less cruel than the old system of chattel slavery. Thomas A. Edison: people who will not turn a shovelful of dirt on the project Muscle Shoals Dam, nor contribute a pound of material, will collect more money from the United States than will the people who supply all the material and do all the work. This is the terrible thing about interest. But here is the point. If the nation can issue a dollar bond, it can issue a dollar bill. The element that makes the bond good makes the bill good also. The difference between the bond and the bill is that the bond lets the money broker collect twice the amount of the bond and an additional 20%, whereas the currency, the honest sort provided by the Constitution, pays nobody but those who contribute in some useful way. It is absurd to say our country can issue bonds and cannot issue currency. Both are promises to pay, but one fattens the usurer and the other helps the people. If the currency issued by the people were no good, then the bonds would be no good either. It is a terrible situation when the government, to ensure the national wealth, must go in debt and submit to ruinous interest charges at the hands of men who control the fictitious value of gold. Interest is the invention of Satan. President Woodrow Wilson: a great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men. Just before he died, Wilson is reported to have stated to friends that he had been deceived and that I have betrayed my country. He referred to the Federal Reserve Act passed during his presidency. Sir Josiah Stamp, president of the Bank of England in the 1920s, the second richest man in Britain. Banking was conceived in iniquity and was born in sin. The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create deposits, and with the flick of the pen they will create enough deposits to buy it back again. However, take it away from them, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear, and they ought to disappear, for this would be a happier and better world to live in. But if you wish to remain the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create deposits. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banks can in fact inflate, mint, and unmint the modern ledger entry currency. Ralph M. Hawtrey, former Secretary of the British Treasury, banks lend by creating credit. They create the means of payment out of nothing. Robert H. Hemphill, credit manager of Federal Reserve Bank, Atlanta, GA. This is a staggering thought. We are completely dependent on the commercial banks. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation, cash or credit. If the banks create ample synthetic money, we are prosperous. If not, we starve. We are absolutely without a permanent money system. When one gets a complete grasp of the picture, the tragic absurdity of our hopeless position is almost incredible. But there it is. It is the most important subject intelligent persons can investigate and reflect upon. It is so important that our present civilization may collapse unless it becomes widely understood and the defects remedied very soon. The Federal Reserve banks are one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever seen. There is not a man within the sound of my voice who does not know that this nation is run by the international bankers. John C. Calhoun, speech in the Senate, May 28, 1836. A power has risen up in the government greater than the people themselves, consisting of many and various powerful interests combined in one mass, and held together by the cohesive power of the vast surplus in the banks. Leon Tolstoy, in What Shall We Do, 1891. Money is a new form of slavery, and distinguishable from the old simply by the fact that it is impersonal, that there is no human relation between master and slave. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Elbridge Gerry, January 26, 1779. Banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. William Cobbett, in Advice to Young Men, I. 1829. The power which money gives is that of brute force. It is the power of the bludgeon and the bayonet. Sophocles, c. 450 BC. Money lays waste cities. It sets men to roaming from home. It seduces and corrupts honest men and turns virtue to baseness. It teaches villainy and impiety. They have not told you. Listed below are the individuals, organizations, and publications that control rather completely what you know or do not know. Please read this list and see if any of them, since 1920, have told you any of the simple truths about our iniquitous debt usury economic system, which you have read in this little booklet. Presidents, vice presidents, or presidential candidates, cabinet members, U.S. judges, or other appointed U.S. officials, any U.S. senator or representative, except Robert La Follette, Charles Binderup, Charles Lindbergh Sr., Louis McFadden, Wright Patman, or John Rarick, all now gone. State governors or members of state legislatures, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Communist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, other so-called voter information groups, news sources such as Associated Press, AP, United Press International, UPI, Reuters, etc., any large daily newspaper or newspaper columnist, radio or TV networks such as ABC, NBC, CBS, and Mutual, radio or television newsmen or commentators, news magazines such as Time, Life, Newsweek, Look, U.S. News and World Report, People, etc., any other widely circulated magazines, books sold on the newsstands in bookstores by Book of the Month Club or any other book clubs, the movies, stage, or other entertainment. Although they often attack politics, religion, or Christian society, they never expose the money system, university or college professors, Any elementary, high school, or college textbooks? Any other educator or educational organizations such as the NEA, PTA, or similar? Labor unions such as the AFL, C10, Teamsters, UMW, farm organizations such as Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, NFO, United Farm Workers, etc. The recent American agricultural movement has exposed the debt usury. Any farm publication. Business organizations such as the National Association of Manufacturers, Better Business Bureau, Chamber of Commerce, etc. Any business or trade publication, medical, scientific, or professional organizations such as the AMA, AAUP, etc. Civic or fraternal organizations such as Rotary, Elks, Lions, Moose, Eagles, Odd Fellows, etc. Veterans organizations such as the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Disabled Vets, etc. The hundreds of civil rights, student, women's lib, and similar protest organizations or publications? Days. They protest racism, atomic weapons, war, pollution, and scores of other supposed wrongs, but never, never expose or object to the robbery of the people by the billionaire bankers. Masonic orders, lodges, or publications. Knights of Columbus, any Catholic pope, bishop, or priest? Father Coughlin of Michigan spoke on radio and wrote books in the 1930s protesting the bankers' plunder of America. He was silenced in a few years on direct orders of the Pope. Since then, few priests have mentioned the plunder. Jewish rabbis or Jewish organizations such as the United Synagogues of America, B'nai B'rith, Anti-Defamation League, etc., World Council of Churches, WCC, National Council of Churches, NCC. Any denominational Protestant minister or church. Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Science, or similar. Charismatic or Pentecostal ministers or churches. Non-denominational or independent ministers or churches. Religious magazines, publishing houses, or bookstores, evangelists or crusaders on radio and television, your minister? Anyone? By the 1980s, virtually no prominent individual or national organization of influence in America, including religious organizations, opposes or exposes the bankers' plunder. Because of that silence, most Americans live out their whole lives in this land without ever learning how they are being robbed. Small groups of patriots are opposing the bankers. One is Liberty Lobby, which publishes The Spotlight, a weekly newspaper, $32 per year or $59 for 2 years, 300 Independence Ave, SE, Washington, D.C., 2003. Each issue exposes the anti-American shenanigans of the bankers, communists, and other enemies of America. Every patriotic American family should subscribe. Read this short booklet over again. Since the politicians, the major news media, and the churches will not warn the people, that warning is up to us and you. Will you pray and act? But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none saith, Restore. Who among you will give ear to this? Who will hearken and hear for the time to come? Isaiah 42:22-23. Ladies and gentlemen, after listening to this, I would like to know what you think. You can email me at tigaus@sbcglobal.net. I know the Mises Institute opposes the Federal Reserve, deficit spending, and modern money theory, or MMT, but they do so for very different reasons. It is quite a long way around Harvey's barn to explain all of that, which I will not do here. You can go over to the Mises Institute online and see what they have to say about all of that. Anyway, the Mises Institute does not oppose interest on debt. As a matter of fact, I think they would argue for it to some degree. Part of that argument is that the interest rates should not be capped, as this is the same thing as price fixing or rent control, and well, as intentioned as it may be, it would only cause more problems down the line. Therefore, we should just allow the market to work it out. And of course, if you listen to the Mises Institute long enough, the market will do all kinds of wonders. It does some, but I really question if it is as great as they make it out to be. I think there are some holes in modern libertarian philosophy, and we have allowed the market to work when it comes to the banking system and usury. And the result is that it does not work it out. People do not end up with lower interest rates. For example, in 2008, credit card companies raised rates to make up for the downturn in the economy. So even if you had perfect credit and never missed a payment, they still raised your rates. In effect, They were price fixing the market because they were the market. Leaving it to the market has only allowed the money to flow upwards to the rich and powerful, keeping the people in debt and allowing the market to be controlled by the lenders. Libertarianism may work with individuals, but in large groups, it does not work. When a team, as in a huge corporation, is playing against a bunch of individuals, the team always wins. The individual consumer can't set market interest rates, can't lobby Congress like they do. The banks set the rates, and they are not lowering the rates over the years, they are raising them. To have 800% interest rates on loans, as payday lenders do, that charge interest by the minute, this is legalized loan sharking. Approved by the high and mighty, the politicians, the lawyers, the judges, big business, Wall Street, and the like. Do you think they're on the side of the poor? The mafia would be embarrassed to charge such rates. Allowing the market to set the rates, well, they are not helping consumers, as libertarians like to say. Only the lenders are getting rich. Everyone else, poorer. When the rubber meets the road, the theory does not work. If your theory was all of that and a bag of chips, it would work in the real world. It does not. The modern money system forces you to borrow money. I remember I was talking to a realtor about my home loan, and he said I had choose to borrow the money, and therefore it is my fault I do not like the terms. So I asked him this question as a thought experiment. If everyone, and I mean every single person in the country, decided not to borrow money, or the banks decided not to loan anyone money, and everyone decided to just pay off the debts they had, what would happen to the economy? There is only one answer anyone can give. That is accurate, and that is that it would collapse. In other words, the whole economy depends upon people and businesses borrowing money. Just look at what happens when the Fed raises interest rates. Every time it slows down the economy, and they know this is what it does. So individuals may choose not to borrow, but everyone can't choose to do that. Well, I guess everyone could, but they clearly know it is not in their best interest to do so, and therefore do not. So it is never going to happen. Yes, I could not get any loans, but I would not have a house, a nice car, and may have to rent or live in a van. And if I choose not to participate at all in modern economics, well, there is always the tent. So borrowing money is not an option. You have to borrow money in a modern economy. Don't believe me? Then just tell every single business not to never borrow money. What will happen? What if no one borrowed money to buy a house, to buy a car? It all falls apart and quickly. You have to borrow money and you do not set the terms. They do. And you may, like I did, complain about some of those terms. They control the market. If you don't believe me, then ask any individual to demand that the bank give them a 1% interest rate. No individual is going to beat the team. It is my theory that you want individuals to be well off by putting more money in their pockets. Certainly, having no interest on debt would make individuals richer. A lot richer. Small businesses also. That is an undeniable fact. It can't be refuted. So those who defend usury, the banking system, certainly are not on the side of the individuals. They could only be on the side of the elite power brokers. You could argue that capping interest rates at 1 or 3% is a good thing in certain areas. I am open to discussion. I think unions help individuals become wealthier. I do not think unions realize they could certainly ask for more, as billionaire companies can afford to pay a lot better than they do. Our current system transfers wealth to the rich, and I'm writing a book on the topic called Rich Cycles and Poor Cycles, which describes this process, and it is quite different from Pastor Emery's booklet here, as it is dealing with a new theory on economics and not attacking interest on debt. I know a lot of conservatives support a gold standard to keep us from having runaway spending and debt. I will say I do not support a gold standard, but that is another topic I will not get into here. What I think is that there is a rock-solid argument against usury and a debt money system. I know there is a large intellectual class that supports it, both left and right. I am clearly opposed to them. I do not think any of them could answer my tough questions. But they can certainly try. Even with that said confidently, I do not think I have all the answers or know it all. I could be overlooking some things. I could be wrong. But you certainly are not going to hear the same thing from the opposition. When you have only groups like the Nation of Islam, the Identity Movement, conspiracy theorists saying interest on debt is a problem, it is easy for mainstream intellectuals to malign the topic, but I think they are wrong, as we can clearly separate the topic from any and all radical thought, and on its own, as a topic, it is worth pondering. Having more money in your pocket will change your life. It would change every single person's life out there. And I would not bemoan the fact that bankers have none of my hard-earned money. But the intellectual class seems to think otherwise. I wonder why. A friend is someone who helps you. An enemy is someone who hurts you. I am your friend. I want to help you have more money, the intellectual class, for all their greatness, brilliance, and the like. Well, don't want to help you. Think on this. Think deeply. Think very deeply. Paying usury will help the high and mighty. Not paying usury will help you. Sincerely and Godspeed, good medicine.